Hello and welcome back to part 2 of our 2-part episode on what it looks like to be the primary discipler of our children, what it looks like to make the hard choices instead of abdicating responsibility. And that can be in any area. We've discussed a variety of areas in the first episode. And today I'm going to dive more into the FAQ that we get. Why do you homeschool? What does your homeschooling background look like? But I just want to encourage you, if anything that we've talked about so far has brought some feelings of being unsettled or discomfort or conviction, I really encourage you to lean into that. I've felt them before, and it's easy to run away from them. It's easy to find outlets to make sure that you stay too busy to listen to them, because it could be something as small as simplifying your life, and it may not feel small to you. You may thrive on busyness or even kind of get a dopamine hit off of never being home, and the Lord may be asking you to come home, maybe not even to homeschooling, but just to being with your family more. And I think that is one thing that I will emphasize over and over again, is that there are only so many hours in our day. And if we have been tasked with being the primary disciplers of our children, we have to be willing to admit that sometimes the math just isn't working out for us to be the primary disciplers. And if we end up being on the flip side of being the people that spend, I think I saw a statistic somewhere that said that the average parent these days spends about 30 minutes of face-to-face time with their children each day. Y'all, there are 24 hours in the day. If we have packed our schedules so tightly that we spend 30 minutes of actual face-to-face contact, meaningful interaction with our children, something needs to change. And I will just say that unequivocally. That's going to be true regardless of your schooling choices. So I'm going to move on now that I've talked about our primary responsibility as parents and that we are to be the primary source of wisdom, ethical decisions, medical decisions, health decisions, friend decisions, and we should never apologize for that. We should never, ever feel shamed or belittled. And I see so much of that in our culture, that we are being condescended to in many ways by a culture that says, listen, wouldn't you be better off just letting an expert do it? Wouldn't you be better off just, letting someone else make the decision for you? Are you really qualified to do that? And we can say, God does not call the equipped necessarily. The Bible talks about how he uses the foolish things of the world, the weak things of the world, to shame the wise and the strong, and that his ways are not our ways, but that they are higher, and that man's wisdom is as foolishness to him. But the Lord actually equips those he calls. And we see, again, so many scriptural examples, whether that's Abraham or Moses or Elijah or Esther or Ruth or Rahab or David. Like, none of these people, quote, had what it took to do what God called them to do until he actually gave it to them. And a lot of times, y'all, he gave it to them bit by bit. He gave it to them piece by piece, not all at once. And I really also want to encourage you that so many of the people that our world calls experts are simply people that have gone through a course. They have several years of experience. They have a diploma. They have their name on the wall. But they haven't necessarily walked through specific circumstances. They haven't, not necessarily, unless they live in your home and they are the parent, they have not actually lived day in and day out with your toddler. They have not actually walked this hard road with your teenager. And so you have to understand that when you are called to be the first touch point of parenting, because you are the parent, that no one else will have your unique expertise, your unique level of knowledge and care and love for your children than you do, because you're the one spending all the time with them, hopefully, unless we have, like I said, just overloaded our schedules. So that point made, I want to shift to talk about why it is that we choose to homeschool. And I think I've given a pretty clear reason already. One, we believe we're to be that first touch point. We believe that we are to be the primary disciplers. We believe that it matters how many hours there are in the day and the ratio of the time that you spend with your children to the time that they're elsewhere. We believe that there are really good ways of educating that maybe don't look like the traditional way. We believe that we've been called to it. We feel convicted to. And I will say that a lot of that positivity towards it, I think the conviction would have still been there, because I truly believe this is what the Lord has called our family to in this season. But a lot of the positivity towards it comes from my own homeschooling experience growing up. If you watched that episode with my mom, and if you haven't yet, I highly recommend that you do. She's amazing. You know that she talked about fighting for the legal right to homeschool her children. And that technically when she started homeschooling my brother, who, like I said, is 4 years older than I am, that she was doing so illegally, very technically. There were already movements within the courts to give full homeschooling rights to Texas parents at the time. I'm from Texas. I live in Texas currently. And it is one of the freer states in which to homeschool. And so part of that is because people like my mom fought for that right to be the parent. It is almost ridiculous if you think about it, that a government would tell you, no, I'm sorry, you the parent, you the person who birthed this child, you the person who potty trained this child, you the person who puts this child to bed every single night, puts the food on the plate, puts the clothes on their bodies, bathes this child, are not qualified to teach this child or to make education choices for this child. That just blows my mind. And yet is the reality of many people around the world. And so my mom fought against that mentality that said, we know better than you as the government. And she said right back, no, I love this child fiercely. I am invested in their education and I will be the one taking charge of it. Thank you very much. And so having won that ability to do so freely, she proceeded to homeschool my brother and me until he was 14 years old, at which point he attended a community college that was about 30 minutes from our house because my dad was going back to get an associate's degree in electronics. And he went and did his basics there, which so many of the basics you do in your first 2 years as a college freshman and sophomore are repeats of similar things that you have done, or sometimes almost carbon copies of things that you have done in high school. Which is an interesting concept because it almost implies that they think that maybe you didn't get what you needed in high school. And, you know, it would be nice if they would just start with the next thing and go forward. But your American history, in our case being Americans, obviously, your sciences. For example, my college algebra class was extremely similar to my Algebra 2 class that I took as a homeschooled sophomore. And my English was extremely similar to the English that my mom had taught me during my freshman and sophomore years when she homeschooled me. And I'll get into the particulars of that in just a minute. But so my brother actually started college at 14 and worked on some of those basics because he could ride with my dad to school. At that point, my mom started teaching for financial reasons at a local, and because it was just my brother and I, there were just two of us, and she had me, and I was 11 and had already had a really strong base in homeschooling. And so she started teaching at a local startup private school, Christian private school, where she ended up being the teacher for like 5 out of 6 of my classes. And we had class sizes of like 6, 7, 8 kids. So it was kind of like being in a homeschool co-op, but I did go 5 days a week. I think Fridays we had a very short day, but my mom was around or teaching me almost that entire time. Very small, very conservative, very Bible believing, very Christian. And so that's what I did for the 2 years that they had it available in their first 2 years of starting, because they hadn't gone into high school yet. I think now they have all the way through 12th grade. That's what I did for middle school in grades 6 and 7, I believe. And then my mom actually started her own hybrid homeschooling co-op where parents brought their kids to her in high school, and she taught all of our subjects to us Monday through Thursday, I believe, for something like 5 hours a day. And then the rest of the time, kids spent at home doing their work at home with their parents. So the parents were still ultimately responsible for their education, but my mom was basically kind of a small group tutor / teacher for all of us. And that's what I did for my 2 years of high school. And then I remember my mom telling me, okay, you can either do junior and senior year in high school, and then you're going to repeat, just like I was saying, several of those subjects in your first 2 years of college, or you can follow in your brother's footsteps and we can go to this community college for a couple of years. All you have to do is, take the SAT, have adequate scores to get in, and at the time I think you had to pass the college entrance exam. And it just depends on the college and it depends on the year because different things have changed. There are a lot more concurrent credits, dual credits that you can do. You can clep out of classes where you can take a test to prove that you're competent in the subject matter of a particular course, and then you don't have to take the course at all. So there are all kinds of options available to, I was going to say homeschoolers, but my mom actually in her long career of teaching has taught dual credit high school English courses within a public school sphere so that they are getting credit for the high school course as well as the college course. So I chose the option of going to college early and not doing things twice. Like I said, I'd already done some of this algebra that I ended up doing again in college, and some of the English as well. And I did most of my sciences in college instead of doing them in high school and then again in college. So that option for me worked really, really well. Now, I will say that without any bragging whatsoever, because this is just how I am wired, I am a very academic person. I really enjoy academics. I can remember that my mom, because there were just two of us, would sometimes do spelling words together with me and my brother. Well, I mentioned that he's 4 years older than I am, but she would do the spelling with us together. So I was in fourth grade, he was in eighth grade, and I would do eighth grade spelling words because I was such a word nerd and I loved words so much and was reading advanced books for my age. That was just kind of where my interests lay. So if you have a kid that doesn't have that same academic interest and you're thinking, man, my kid could never go to college at 15, well, neither does he need to or she need to. This is just something that I'm telling you is an option because of the flexibility of homeschooling. And I love that homeschooling gives you the flexibility to find what works best for your family. Now, co-ops like we have now, if you're in a homeschooling centric area, you might be familiar with 1 day a week co-ops, sometimes 2 day a week co-ops. And in my particular area in East Texas, we have several. Some are branded like Classical Conversations. Some are just one-off for our local community and organized by local mamas. But most of them are about 1 day a week. Those did not exist. The homeschooling was in its infancy, or at least official homeschooling. I have to point out that homeschooling, educating at home, has been the norm for much of history. The whole concept of having a very strict 8 to 2, 3, 4 o'clock schedule with specific subjects at specific times taught by specific teachers and all of the grades segregated is a fairly new concept. That's pretty modern. That's less than 100 years old depending on how you're looking at it. So homeschooling, the concept has existed for most of time. Homeschooling, the movement, was still in its infancy. And so some of the organization that we see now that's, I think, really beneficial wasn't there. So my idea of a co-op was that the homeschooling mamas in our small town would get together with all of their kids to get their crunchy granola mama healthy grocery pickup. So they would order from this particular like Whole Foods store. It wasn't Whole Foods like the brand, but it was a whole holistic food store. And they would have this truck that would come to a park, and that's where we did our crunchy granola mom food drop, like a like a drug deal in the parking lot, except that not so discreet, certainly, because it's nothing to be ashamed of. We were just doing our fruit spritzers and our carob chips instead of our chocolate chips and just all the various things that they got from their crunchy sources. So the mamas would meet and talk and pick up their food items, and the kids would run around and play. And we might, find some cool bug and talk about it, or somebody might bring a craft, or we might have homemade bubbles that we made or something like that. But there wasn't official learning happening. But we know more and more from research that so much of childhood free play is actually contributing very significantly to brain development and to intelligences that go far beyond the academic realm, but also in the academic realm. And so we didn't realize it, but we were actually sharpening our brains. We just thought we were having fun. So now my kids and I get to participate in basically a hybrid schooling situation where we do 4 days at home and then 1 day at a homeschool co-op. Or in the case of my high school kids who have a math or a science, they do a second hour of that. So another half day. So a day and a half basically outside the home, and the rest of the time we're home together. And I was talking about flexibility, and that's not what we've always done. We did that hybrid 2 day a week somewhere else, 3 days a week at home, little tiny school that allowed us to attend for part of that time. We did that for 2 years. We've homeschooled exclusively for several years. We've done the co-op option for several years. Sometimes we have had Fridays be our mostly free day, and we'll do what I call Grace Girls, which I have a whole podcast on mom friendships, and I explain the concept of Grace Girls. And we'll have an activity that we learn during Grace Girls, and the little boys will come and play. Again, free play for the win. And so that will be our homeschooling activity for the day. And we might spend the rest of the day cleaning or baking or doing other life skills type things. And that's another reason that I love homeschooling. And one of our whys for homeschooling is I really appreciate that it has the freedom of schedule to live a little more slowly and to fit in some things that whenever I feel like our schedule is getting too busy, whenever it's getting too full, when we go from one thing to the next and we're out of the house all day, I feel like a lot of some of our family's favorite activities fall by the wayside. We love to read books together. We love to watch shows together. We love to play Foursquare on our driveway together, or to go out and play knockout or, pig or horse with the basketball. We love to play board games together. We love to, sometimes we actually haven't done them this year. We need to, but we'll do a family bake-off where the boys against the girls will pick a recipe. Let's say the category is pies, and we'll each choose our own recipe, and then we'll invite someone over to taste test to see who wins and to vote on who wins. That's something that we love doing together. And I have several kids that love just baking in general. I have several kids who would practice sports all day long. And I love that they have some freedom in their schedule to do that without it happening after the official school day, in which case they're still not getting home till 5 or 6 in the evenings, and we haven't had a chance to do dinner together. Speaking of dinner, we have dinner together almost every night. We love having the freedom to have most of those evenings together as a family. Now, are we going to co-op? Are we going to play dates? Are we going on field trips? Do we have Grace Girls? Do we go to the gym? Do we go swimming? Do we do outreaches with our church? Do we go on trips? Yes, of course. We aren't just staying home all the time. But that slower schedule allows so much breathing room to be able to do what I keep threatening that I'm going to do a podcast about, this 45-day trip to Europe, because we were done with our schooling year on April 29th. That's the day that my oldest son graduated. So we were done with our schooling year on April 29th, and we were able to leave on May 1st, which meant that the first 3/4 of our trip to Europe, it wasn't nearly as crowded as it was at the last bit, because we were there during the time when most people were still in school. And that freedom to be able to be kind of on an opposite schedule from, quote, the rest of the world is really beneficial when you're wanting to cut down on crowded situations or get off-season pricing for things or cheaper tickets. All of those are what I would consider a huge perk. So there are very practical reasons why we homeschool. And again, I loved having the freedom to be a grade or two ahead, or to do activities during times when my friends weren't able to do them. So something that I think that it takes a lot of within the homeschooling mindset is you can't just say, I'm so glad we have all this freedom. Now I'm not going to do anything. You have to kind of be intentional with your time. Now, listen to me. You may be like, Abby, that's great that you love sports and you love board games and you love movies and that's just not who we are. And we are more of we don't leave the house very much family, and we love books. We'll sit around and read for hours. Sean my husband was public schooled. And while he was not opposed to homeschooling, he hadn't had much experience with it. But the one experience that he had growing up, and it was one that really predisposed him to be positive towards homeschooling, was a large family that he knew whose kids were, according to him, and he does not use this word lightly, brilliant. They were extremely smart kids. And do you know what they did all the time? They read. Their primary occupation in education was to read widely and deeply and often. And he said they were so well-rounded and so well-informed and so well-versed in so many different subjects that he found himself very impressed that even though it wasn't super structured and it wasn't very scheduled, that this love for learning had been engendered in them by parents who also loved to read and also loved knowledge and also loved learning and also loved the Lord and were fascinated by creation. They were fascinated by the ways the Lord had made the world, and they encouraged their children to investigate those ways. And so these kids were good at chess, they were good at math, they were good at English and grammar and all these things, but they were good at them because they had intrinsic interest in them, and that they had dived deep into these subjects because of a love for learning and a love for the subjects, not simply because it had been dictated to them to learn those subjects. So when I say that we can't just simply say, oh, our schedule is free, that's one of the beauties of homeschooling, and then do nothing. Your schedule could look like nothing to someone else if you're not leaving the house, if you're not going to parks, if you're not going on field trips, and yet you are being very intentional with your learning, like this family was with all of their reading. But it's also possible to truly do nothing and to say, I homeschool, and yet not make the effort to actually engage in what your children love to do, engage in teaching them the basic foundations and the building blocks of learning, like learning to read well and learning to read with intention and learning to read with critical thinking skills. All of those things are so crucial to any kind of education that we have going forward. People always ask me, what curriculum would you suggest, Abby? And I know that that's a very legitimate question, especially considering that now with homeschooling, the options are astoundingly overwhelming. Like, I couldn't begin to name all of the options. And I'll actually list some of our favorites in the show notes just to kind of give you some jumping off points. And I know it's so frustrating when you don't have a background in this, if you're interested and someone tells you, just do your research. You're like, where do I even start for research? I had someone ask me that the other day. I don't even know where to start. And I'm thinking, you have more information than you could ever want. So just start somewhere and see how you feel about it. But they don't know how they feel about it because they don't have a background in it, right? Well, I grew up not Charlotte Mason homeschooled, not nature journaling, not just free reading like this family did, but I grew up with a pretty traditional bookwork education. We did Abeka, we did Bob Jones, we did Saxon Math. These are the curricula that were available to homeschoolers 30 years ago. And you know what? They're still available and they're still really solid. And I still use some of those. And I still have a pretty traditional approach because that's how my brain works. Now, do I have to adapt for my children who have different learning preferences? Yeah, to some extent. But I'm also married to a man who learned in a traditional way, who is good with bookwork, who is good with reading, who is good with then going and researching the things that he has more interest in, reading more about those. And I'm the same way. And so while our approach isn't as exciting or imaginative as some that I've seen, we are certainly not unschoolers, for example. I still think that the goal for us is similar to what many homeschool parents' goals are, which are to provide our children with a solid foundation in education and then provide them a lot of opportunities to just live, to just be, to develop life skills, to do things they love, to pursue interests because they're interested in them, not because they get a grade for them. And I will make a point on that as I close. I love good grades. I didn't get grades growing up, except for when my mom graded a math test or a spelling test, but I was still majorly motivated by that number. That's just how my personality works. I definitely have kids that aren't as interested in the grade. And I know some homeschoolers absolutely hate number or letter grades because they feel like they are artificial representations, that they are artificial motivators. And yet I don't think that that's a blanket statement that you can make for every single personality type, because some personality types like mine and like my husband's are happiest when we make a 97 or a 102. So we're going to be the easy ones to teach in a traditional academic way because we're always going to be striving for that 102. And I just encourage you that if you have some of those, not to belittle that love for kind of achievement as being not true learning, because there's going to be a lot of true learning that happens even within the framework of wanting to make a quote good grade. But I also want to encourage you not to get frustrated by the kiddos that need a different approach, that need to be able to move while they learn, that might need to be doing math facts while they're jumping a rope, that need to be outside in the sunshine getting some vitamin D, that need to be given more breaks. Like I said, I have a kid that absolutely loves to move, and his take on homeschooling, he is my one that would probably prefer a traditional school setting, or at least he thinks that he would prefer a traditional school setting. He's never been in a school setting where he has to be there from 8 to 2. And so, it might be that he would change his mind on the amount of hours spent there alone, but maybe not, because he's very social and he loves sports and he loves spending time with friends. And so we do our best to accommodate him by making sure that he has lots of opportunities to go out and practice basketball during the day in between math and chemistry, that he has lots of opportunities to hang out with friends, that he's able to participate in sports through our local homeschool league, that he is able to be in a co-op and spend time with his friends 1.5 days a week. You don't just say, again, you're not just the island that says my way or the highway and this is the only way we're doing things. And I refuse to take your personality and your preferences into consideration. And you also don't say, how would I know? What could I possibly know about any of this? When the answer is, again, more information at your fingertips than you could possibly process in a lifetime. And as a side note, I actually have mostly social children, I would say, that really enjoy, just the same as that one child I was talking about that loves the social aspect, loves the sports, enjoy social aspects of being with other children. And I was the same way. And I had access to all kinds of opportunities because my mom paid attention to my personality and made sure I did. She put me in community sports and she signed me up for community theater, and we organized a homeschool chorale so that I could enjoy exercising musical talents and all of these things that she paid attention to. But the majority of my children, even in spite of their social natures and the opportunities that they desire to have to be with other kids, really do value what I've been talking about, which is the freedom to be able to pursue things outside of a more rigid school schedule. And my oldest, who just graduated, told me that that's just something that he really enjoyed. He's like, yeah, I love being around other people. I love the opportunities we have to do that. But I just loved that the schedule gave me the flexibility to go at my own pace, to do more on one day and less on another, and basically to kind of be the master of my schedule to some extent while still having to turn things in on time. I'm putting some of those words in his mouth because he was not that long-winded. But the idea was that he really appreciated that homeschooling gave him freedom to do those things. So I encourage you to lean into being the parent, because that's what God has tasked you with being, and everything that entails, with gusto. Whether you feel like you have the gusto or not, the gusto can come. The conviction to be the parent is what keeps us in good stead on the days that we're lacking the motivation. But I also encourage you to remember that that's going to look different for every family, that's going to look different for every kid. I have friends who have some kids in public school, some kids that they homeschool, and some kids at a private school. And it's because they are looking closely at what works best for each child, and they feel a conviction to allow this child to do this and to put this child in this situation which will help him thrive. And that's not going to be feasible for a lot of families. I will fully acknowledge that, but I do admire the level of all in that it takes to be willing to go that many different directions. Now, it may be that next year they have a conviction that it's too many different directions and they pull it back in. But my point is that we listen to the conviction, that we lean in to what God's word says, that we are consistent to convey it to our children, that when we lie, when we sit, when we walk, when we stand, that we are every day declaring the goodness of God and showing them what that looks like practically and how to learn about it as we do daily life together. If you guys enjoyed today's program, I would be so honored if you would subscribe and share with others. And if you're looking for more daily content on motherhood and biblical responses to cultural issues, you can follow along on Instagram at m.is.for.mama.